Nestled away in the backcountry hills of western Montana are the scattered ruins of the town of Keystone. We're not far from civilization out here, perhaps only 4 miles off the highway, but without knowing where you're going, this place can easily be missed. Keystone was not the original name of this site. Prospectors led by a man named Philip O'Rourke were combing the hills here in the 1880s when they struck quartz gold in 1887. Shortly after, they struck iron twice, calling their strikes the Iron King and Iron Queen lodes. Further strikes of silver and lead turned the area into a real mining hub, and it was silver that seemed to guide the town's fate. They set up a camp, first calling it O'Rourke after Philip O'Rourke, which was settled along the creek, and as many as 500 people moved to O'Rourke with the hopes of working the various mines that were to be established. With such a boom in population in only the first year, it was time to turn the small mining camp into a proper town. Up sprang a hotel, school, several shops, boarding houses, and even a miners' union hall. In 1891, United States Senator Thomas Carter filed the paperwork for the post office, naturally changing the name of the town from O'Rourke to Carter, after himself. Silver was in hot demand at the time, after the passing of the Sherman Silver Purchase Act in 1890, in which the U.S. government had a minimum amount of silver it was required to buy each year in order to combat deflation. Yes, deflation is actually a thing and is the opposite of inflation. How times have changed, right? But I digress. The town prospered, but the act was short-lived, being repealed around 1893, ultimately stifling the town's growth, as well as that of many of the other silver towns in the area, and leading to their eventual decline. The Carter post office closed and the population dwindled. The prosperity of the town was directly linked to the value of silver, and when silver rebounded in the 1910s, so did Carter. The nearby mines were purchased by Pennsylvania investors and the town was given new life. Now, in the years prior, the town of Carter had fallen off the map while it was dormant, and another settlement nearby, named Carter, sprang up. Now, with this new boom in the original Carter, the names of the two towns conflicted, and the newly revitalized town of Carter was rebranded by the investors out east as Keystone, after Pennsylvania, the Keystone State. The post office reopened, the population grew, and Keystone thrived once more. But the silver crash of the 1930s killed the town once and for all. The mines were closed, the town boarded up, and the people moved out. These now empty, silent streets had once been the home of hundreds of miners, merchants, and their families. First coming into town, we're met by the remains of the Keystone Gulch Overpass, built in 1914, which once supported a rail line belonging to the Chicago, Milwaukee, St. Paul, and Pacific Railroad. This rail line did not stop here in 1914. Even then, when the town of Keystone was populated, the town was considered to be of too little importance. Many of the vacant wooden structures at Keystone remain standing until only the last few years, when they've begun collapsing one by one. This photograph, taken around 2000 by Larry and Vivian Rowland, shows us what this house once looked like. This photograph, by the way, is borrowed from the Montana Ghost Towns book by Barbara Pfeiffer, which I highly recommend if this interests you. A vacant lot, cleared even of most of its debris, is where the town's hotel, Hotel Vendome, had housed guests of the old mining settlement. There was something about Keystone that made this visit unsettling. Perhaps it was the lack of information on the site making it more of a mystery, combined with the weather and the dusk that was settling. Perhaps it was just being in the back hills, or the old cliché of feeling like we were not alone. We are more or less in the middle of nowhere, but it's not entirely the middle of nowhere. There actually is one populated house here, and we're going to keep our distance. We don't want to disturb any private property or anything like that. We are checking out the ruins that are outside of their property. The first ruin we came upon is a large house in the southern corner of the town site. the walls of which were mostly still standing. Coming back behind the house, this wall is in great condition, actually. Holding up very well. You can actually still see some of the remaining plaster that was used to fill in the cracks between the logs. No vandalism that I can see, no graffiti, nothing like that. This place is in beautiful shape. I do see some modern soda cans back there though. I'm gonna have to come around and see what that is. Looks like an old piece of paper on there. Much of the tin roof is still here. This site has been very well respected by any visitors. We can see all of these nails sticking out. It would have had another layer of wood on the outside. What you see here is the inside layer. And the reason it's been broken off probably is because that outside wood would have been a lot more valuable and you'd want to take that and reuse that. An old stove, probably wood-fired, and tar paper for the ceilings. You can see in the back there's actually a ladder, which would have gone up to a second floor, or at least a storage crawl space up there. Shelves still remain mounted to that wall with one of the old metal supports still there. Some of the old vinyl wallpaper. Actually, this could also be really cheap floor vinyl. I can't tell. You can see that the wooden construction of this part of the cabin is different from this. This probably would have been an addition built, a few years later from the original cabin. The original cabin would have stood at least another story up. It's a rubbish pile going down the hill. So many cans. The top of an old jar. Look at that. This looks like the same type of jug that we saw out in the rubbish bin out back. And there's another piece there. It's quite probable it's actually all just the same jug. But here we've got something. Small pile of wood. This would have been a great spot for an outhouse. Although, I see an indentation here. There could have been an older structure here that was taken away, and this wood is all that remains. I don't want to disturb it. I don't want to go digging into that. Who knows if something lives in there too. But my guess, based on its proximity and the amount of wood we're looking at here, is this is an outhouse. That actually goes down pretty dang deep. I can't see the bottom. There's just tires and more tires and more tires after that. Here's another old structure. Automobile parts, old jars, a pot. Oh, it's cracked. Able Products Incorporated, Los Angeles. Behind the main street is a large depression in the ground, the low-lying creek basin of the Keystone Creek. Along the eastern rim of the basin are a row of log cabins with low ceilings, still in a recognizable form.
This one still has its frame in the window. There was something over there. I've seen one of those. That's a chicken coop. That's an old chicken coop. Well, it's definitely a fixer-upper. In this market, the asking price would probably be somewhere around $450,000. It still has so much of its original hardware. It's a really beautiful log cabin.
Being deep in the mountains, it was no surprise that we came across bear droppings while exploring the site. This likely is from a black bear who was munching on the grass. The second cabin was so densely packed with brush and thickets that there was simply no way to get into it. We could, however, see it from above.
So down in this little valley, in this basin right here, we have one structure, a second one right in there, which I think is a chicken coop. This one, which still has its frames and is in great shape with some of its hardware. And then this one, which is one bulky little cabin, and it's slanting over. I don't want to stick around too long. This place is honestly starting to creep me out a bit.
Another house that was 2 stories and appears to be in decent shape can be seen from the basin, but it appears to be in somebody's backyard.
This looks like the remains of the last significant structure. Probably just a cabin. Remnants of a screen window or a screen door. Insulated roof. Usually insulated with mud and moss. Over here we have just a stack of old lumber. The lumber looks to be the same age as some of the buildings here. This could be spares. This could be salvaged. These are massive. Some of these aren't even hewn. Oh, but they have braces. This could be telegraph poles. Beyond this fence is private property, and I'll respect that. An old water tank. Wooden pallets.
The sun had begun to set on Keystone, and that feeling of someone else being here hadn't left us. It was time to pack up and leave these ruins behind, but I wanted to take a quick peek farther up the mountain and see if there were any additional buildings off the main site.
I just drove a little ways up the road just to see if there was anything else heading up the mountain, and there is. There's more cabins, so let's do a quick look at those. You know, just a lone cabin in the woods. Totally caved in. We're actually looking at the top of the roof there. Interesting to note. These beams were actually once lateral going across, so the wall has actually shifted to the point where the formerly lateral beams are now more vertical than lateral. That's just from the roof caving in and pushing this wall out. We can actually see an A-frame for the roof right here. It looks like it rolled down when it collapsed. So this would have been a taller cabin.
As I was ready to pack up and leave, the sun came out for just a minute or two before it settled behind the crest of the mountain. The murky, bleak ruins of this cabin that overlooked Keystone suddenly came to life. It felt warm and peaceful. Frankly, I didn't want to leave. The history of Keystone was not as vibrant or rich as some of the other towns we've explored, but there was something about the remains that was truly haunting. If you enjoyed this brief look back onto this little-known frontier mining town, consider joining me on Patreon at the link below. A huge thank you to my patrons, especially Marlo Perez, Kaiser Wilhelm II, Trent Greger, Zach Richards, Tom Shavada, Donald Anderson, Cody Henricks, Joan L. Haynes, Rob M., Amos Mayhew, Corey Andrews, Dakota Charbonneau, Nicholas Musella, Zolt Bognar, Cole Tanik, Eric Meringue, Sophie Baber, Tyler Test, Exotic Exploring, Jakob Martin Hansen, Kelly Black, and Steven Schwankert.